Okay, our session is being recorded. Again, make sure everyone's on mute so we don't have a lot of feedback. I can hear a couple of people still. Carlos, maybe. Are you on mute? Make sure you're on mute. Jesse, your video is still on. All right, I'm the presenter. All right, again, I still think there's a couple of you. It's going to be a lot of feedback if you don't put it on mute, guys. So put it on mute. Carlos, I can see you on video. You need to close your video.
Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. Sometimes that is not what you want to see. But anyway, you look fine this evening. It sucks up some bandwidth. That's all. So again, put on mute. And then we'll be fine. Okay, let me go share my screen, and we'll get started here. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, first I know you want to get into the walkthrough, but first I'm going to do a little presentation. I always have to set the stage. Okay. And it's important to set the context. Now, hopefully by now, you've tried logging in. You have your password from your faculty member and the other login instructions with your email address and stuff. And I think once you use this software, you're going to really like it a lot. And again, it does one thing and one thing well, and that is to frame the decision, okay? So I want to set a little bit of context. Some of you may have already looked at Mr. Taylor's excellent walkthrough. That's great. But let me just add a little perspective that's a little less structured, a little more informal, if you will. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. A little overview of Decisions First to make sure you understand what's going on, and then the software walkthrough and so forth. I'll say a little bit about the assignment, and then if we have questions, we can come back to those. So hold your questions till the end. Now, up until this semester, when we had purchased textbooks, we used an excellent textbook called, actually in the textbook, it's a book. A very good book outlining the whole concept of analytics, but it's called Keeping Up with the Quants. Now, we're not using any textbooks anymore. Again, make sure everybody's on mute, but I'm using the main precepts from that textbook because they're very general and still very useful. And basically, as I said a little bit in the intro, we have three things to do: frame the problem, solve the problem, communicate, and act on the results. I think somebody's still not on mute. Try to put your system on mute so we don't get feedback, people. I think there's still a couple of minutes. You get a lot of feedback. So when we talk about framing, here's the kind of things we're trying to do. What's the problem? How serious is it? And so forth. Okay, I can still hear somebody not on mute. Please put your systems on mute. If you haven't already, you should have a mute button. Adrienne, I think it's you. Adrienne?
Yes, I'm trying to put it on mute. For some reason, my computer froze.
Well, okay. Well, just, okay. You should be able to, all right, you should be able to still mute your speakers even with it frozen. But anyway. Okay, so these are the steps we want to do. And of course, the Decisions First software I specifically chose because it does these steps well. Again, it's one of the few software packages. Wait a minute, I've got to go figure out who's not on mute because it's still, we're getting a lot of feedback here. We're still getting feedback. I'm trying to get, Carlos, you're still not on mute. If you're not, you should be able to just turn your speakers off, people. Oh, okay, there we go. Let me go back to sharing my screen again. All right, get back to where I was. That's not what I wanted. Excuse me. Okay, so this does one thing. It does one thing well, and that's the framing aspect. Again, you'll use different software to do the analytics, but this frames it. And part of the framing is deciding what analytic you might want to use to support the decision. And of course, we all love this. Those of us who like framing love this little quote from Albert Einstein that supposedly, if he had an hour to save the planet, he'd spend 59 minutes defining the problem, which is another way of framing the problem, and 1 minute resolving it. Well, I won't go quite that far. We're not spending 59/60ths of this course framing problems, but we are spending 3 or 4 weeks. So it's an important aspect, and I think it carries forward. If you're going to go out and be a data scientist, one of the things you have to be very careful of is to make sure you're working on the right problem and people understand the caveats, the resources necessary, all the links, etc. And that's why we do this. Okay, Mr. James Taylor is the owner, CEO, and proprietor of DecisionsFirst, also becoming a good friend of mine because I talk to him frequently. He and I have presented at several conferences together. But, you know, if I had a better package, I would probably use it, but I like his right now. But anyway, the first thing you have to do is think about the different kinds of decisions. I know this is old hat. If you've had any management courses, you're well aware that there are strategic decisions, which are basically very few in number, but very large impact. Whether to move to offshore production, whether to open another plant, whether to change your product line. There are tactical mid-level decisions that occur more frequently. You know, reorganizing supply chain, changing the way we evaluate our customers, et cetera. And then there are operational decisions. Operational decisions. They occur very, very frequently, over and over and over. They have minimal impact individually, but collectively a large impact. And that's where this software works best. You can use it for any type of decision, strategic, tactical, or operational, but it's designed really to work best at the operational level. And it's designed to work best for decisions which are have the following criteria. First of all, they're repeatable. In other words, they happen often, which is operational. Secondly, they're non-trivial. If they were trivial, you certainly wouldn't need to frame them. You wouldn't need an analytic. You just say, oh, that's simple. Just boom, yes, no. If they need to have a measurable business impact. Again, it's probably very small on an individual case level, but collectively, because they occur so often, they have a large impact. And finally, these make good candidates for automation. One of the things that you see coming more and more out of analytics is turning it into an automated system, usually with business rules, but more on that later in this and other courses. So those are the kinds of decisions that are best suited for using Mr. Taylor's DecisionsFirst software. But as I said, you can use it for any kind of decisions. Now, we're going to be doing something with DecisionsFirst software called Decision Requirements Modeling. And there are really 5 steps, and you'll be doing these 5 steps as part of your tasking. You'll identify a decision that you're going to be making. There should be one key decision supported by subsidiary decisions, supported by other things that I'll show you in a minute. The second thing you'll do is fully describe what that decision is and document how improving that decision would impact the business objectives. Now, you have to make some of that up for this first assignment, but if it were real world, you'd want to actually do that. Specify the requirements. In other words, detailed requirements. That's where you get into building this thing I'm going to build tonight called the Decision Requirements Diagram. And that's where we hook in all of the decisions, how they're interrelated. We hook in the knowledge sources, which are expertise, regulations, etc., that we need. We bring in the data that we need. We identify the analytic we're going to be using. We may identify key performance indicators, etc. You'll see all that. I'm going to build a DRD, Decision Requirements Diagram. When you refine that, meaning add levels of detail and get it just the way you want, then you wrap all of that together and generate something called an Analytic Requirements Document, ARD. You may hear me refer to it as an ARD. And what you're going to do as part of your first assignment is to build a complete ARD and attach that to your short 2 to 4 page write-up. The write-up, I'll talk more about that when I talk about the assignment, but the write-up will be explaining sort of what the decision is and what you tried to do and so forth. And then the ARD, which contains the DRD, the Decision Requirements Document, will have all that in it. It'll become much clearer to you as we go through this tonight. So, where do we start? Whoops, we start there. You start by saying, here's the decision I want to make. And ideally, it would meet those criteria. Repeatable, measurable, non-trivial, and measurable impact, and a candidate for automation, ideally. And I'm going to show you one tonight that is of that ilk, one that a student did. And Mr. Taylor's demonstration where he goes through trying to determine what kind of an offer to make a customer who may or may not be thinking of churning, i.e. leaving the company, is of that ilk. So those are the kinds of good decisions that are well suited for his software. So you have to think this through as you decompose your decision. What is required to make the decision? What kinds of information do I need? What kind of guidelines, policy, expertise, regulations do I need? What kind of models do I need? And so forth. So you'll see how that unfolds. When you start drawing it, and for those of you that haven't yet logged into Decisions First, it's going to look something like this. There'll be only three kinds of main objects on the screen. There'll be ovals, which are data objects, information or data. We now call them data objects. There'll be rectangles, which are decisions. They are decision objects. And there'll be these rectangles with the beveled bottom. And those are sources of knowledge. Knowledge can be expertise, it can be regulations, it can be Mary's experiences, whatever it is. It's very subjective, obviously, in some cases, but it's important to the decision. Almost all decisions have some level of knowledge inputs. And so you'll be putting all of these pieces together to frame your decision, which will begin to look something like this. If you go through Mr. Taylor's demo, and this is a piece of that, you'll see that his overarching decision is what marketing offer should I make to this customer. But in order to determine that, I have to first figure out what kind of eligibility does he or she have, and so forth. And then you can see here are some ovals, which represent data. Here are some beveled rectangles, which represent expertise. And they're starting to get linked together, but some are not linked. And you keep working on that and thinking about it until you end up, wow, this is how it goes. Now, when you see this, again, so you'll understand what's going on, this is the overarching decision. There should always be one overarching decision. However, there are sub-decisions that need to be made first to support that. I can't select a marketing offer until I check the offer timing, determine what offer products are available to offer, and determine what value it is. Maybe I don't want to offer this customer an offer. And I also need to bring in what offers are in the data set that I have available. I need to bring in some data about the customer. I need to bring in some marketing knowledge and expertise, some information about the customer loyalty, which may be subjective. And I need to have an assessment of the customer's propensity to accept. So you can see he begins to flesh this out. If you go through that tutorial, he will go through in great detail in about 45 minutes, laying out how he built this entire scenario. Now, for each of these, you can drill down and start putting in details, and should. For example, determine refund eligibility. Where was that? Well, that's right here. Determine refund. Well, it was on the other chart. Determine refund eligibility is a sub-decision. You can put in a description, and as you'll see in a moment, we can drill down even more and put in the kinds of information that we need, the kinds of answers we will accept. This happens to be a yes-no one. We will only accept a yes or no answer to this question, this decision, and then we get into some other things. You'll see that when I do the demo. Over here, it tells you who built it. It tells you other people that are involved. You can have multiple people working on a decision, and they'll all show up. So when he got all done, again, as those of you know who have looked through the scenario tutorial by Mr. Taylor, it looked like this. You can see there's quite a few linkages there now. A lot of stuff goes into making this decision about what marketing offer to give this character to try to keep him or her from leaving the company, churning. And you can see there's all kinds of pieces, and they fit together, and some pieces go to multiple things, but all of that is tied together and has detail, and so you get everyone to sign up to that, and that becomes the deal. Here's what we're going to do. This is how we're going to make this decision. Now, you say, gee, that seems like a lot of detail, a lot of work, and very cumbersome. But yes, it is. But it's the only way you're going to make sure that this works out well. Trust me, too many, way too many analytical efforts just wing it, and they don't end up with anything of value. As an example, Cisco uses this approach for every decision they make. Now, that's a very reputable company. Mr. Taylor has other large companies, but that's his biggest client, Cisco, using this for every decision they make that involves any kind of analysis. And everybody has to sign up to it. So we say, oh, yeah, I know who's going to do this piece. I know where it's coming from. I know how it fits to everything, and so forth. Final thing you want to make sure you do is link the action, which is picking the marketing offer, and have some kind of analytics in here. And here you can see it's going to be a model that predicts the customer likelihood to churn. If it turns out very low, if Steve Canode's been with AT&T for 20 years and he's not leaving, why do we even make him an offer? Why should we give him a deal? We want to give deals to good customers who are thinking of leaving. Okay, So we're ready now to go through and try to build one of these, or I'm going to build one of these a little bit. I'm not going to build the whole thing because that would take a long time. This is an actual assignment done by one of a student in this program from last year. And this is what he did. He worked for a bank, and he said, you know, I have the kind of decision we're talking about. Exactly. We have to decide every day, multiple times a day, whether to hold or sell distressed mortgages. And I know a lot about that, and so that's going to be my project for assignment 1. So he put this together. You can see there's a lot of pieces there. The ones that have dotted lines are sources of expertise, or what we call knowledge sources. The ones that have solid lines are decisions or data feeding into those decisions. Remember, this is the primary or overarching decision. These are what? Subsidiary decisions that have to be made first. And actually, this has to be made first. It's also a decision. Remember, rectangles are decisions before we can make this decision. And this decision includes what comes out of here, plus market bid prices, plus some trader experience. Now, I showed it to Mr. Taylor. I said, this is a pretty good one. Not perfect. There's some things I would improve on. I won't tell you what. Not perfect, but very good. And he liked it so much that he now includes it in one of his documents, the Framing Analytical Requirements, as a good example of the kind of real-world decision that you should be using DecisionsFirst for. Okay? So I'm going to go through this and build this a little bit. Now, I'm going to leave this slide up so I can come back to it because I can't memorize this. I'm not the person who built this, but let's go take a look. This is what the software looks like when you open it. Again, all of you should be able to now access your software. It will look like this with one exception. You will not have the admin button up here. The admin button is only for the course manager or the data. This is a database, actually, database manager. So that would be me for my section and the other professors for their sections. You will have the other nodes and the other icons, and there are many here. Okay, now again, like all software, you have to get used to the interface, the UI. But let's take a look. If we hover over here, this creates a new decision requirements diagram. That's what that is. That's a decision requirements diagram, okay? This is a new decision. Again, that's what each one of these rectangles is. This is a new objective. I'll say more about that later. This is input data. That's those data ovals. This is a knowledge source. Now you say, well, why do we have so many icons when you only mentioned 3? You can only put 3 on the screen in the DRD, the decision requirements diagram, but the others are supporting objects, and I'll show how that works a little bit later. So here we are, and we're going to recreate this. So let's start by putting this overarching decision in. Now, you don't have to do that. You can start bottom up and say, I'm not sure what my overarching is, although I would think you'd want to know that. But mostly top down. You put that in, and then you start putting pieces in, and you start putting the pieces together, okay? So what I'm going to do is create a new decision requirements diagram. So there's my blank screen. Here are my 3 objects that I said you could build. Input data, that's the oval. Decisions, that's the rectangle. And the beveled rectangle, which is a knowledge source. The sketch objects, I'll say a little bit about later, but you don't need to worry about those. And this is how you link them together. So what do we want to start with? Well, we want to start with a decision, don't we? So let's drag that over. Hold it down and drag it over. And there it is, decision. Now, I should have named my diagram first because that's the decision. That's down here. So I should have named the diagram first. I'll call it Fall 2016 Practice. Or something like that, if I type right. And I can describe what that is and should. That is the overall diagram. But this is the decision that I just put in right here, so don't let me confuse you there. There's the decision, and you can see it's just called decision. Now, what should it be called? Well, it should be called hold or sell distressed mortgage, right? There it is. You should also have a description for that, okay? And it's something like balance sheet, managers, come on, fingers. Balance sheet managers need to determine whether a formerly distressed mortgage is performing, I'm doing this whole well enough to be sold to investors. Now, I'm not going to type that description in for every note, obviously, but I wanted you to see that you need to have enough in there that somebody looking at it says, oh, I know what we're trying to do. Okay, and I know why. This is a decision, and this is why. Now, let's talk about these icons, because now we're down one level. Here's home. These tabs stay open. Here's a search page. I'll close that. I don't need the search page yet. And here's where we are with our decision requirements diagram. Okay, and there's our first object. Now let's see what we have here. We have save. Well, I'm going to click on that. You should do that often, often, often. There is an automatic save feature in there, but it may not save as frequently as you'd like. The next one is export to image. Suppose I had this beautiful diagram on the screen, and I want to save it as an image. You click, and there it is, save as image. Somebody's got their mic open. Please put it on mute so we don't get feedback. Thank you. The next one is called Edit Object. You'll use this icon a lot to edit the object. I'll edit this one in just a moment. The next one is called Print. I'll come back to that a little bit later. This one's called Print All. This one looks like Word, doesn't it? And it is. We'll get to that in a minute. There's Delete. There's refresh the screen. All this does is zoom, make this bigger or smaller, and this is, you can zoom it in a bigger percentage. That's it. Don't need to worry about permalink either. Now again, I always try to balance using the software versus making this a course where we teach the software. We're not teaching you the software. You're going to use it. You're not going to become the world's greatest whiz-bang expert with Decisions First in just these 2 or 3 weeks that we use it in this course. But it will be available to you throughout the program. If you'd like to use it in other courses, feel free. If you'd like to use it in your capstone to help frame things, and I encourage that, I think it would be a great idea. So you're going to learn enough to be able to use it to do an assignment. If you want to use it in great detail, you'll spend more time with it. You'll look at all of the various tutorials and help screens that Mr. Taylor has. You'll ask a lot of questions. You'll try a lot of things. But you'll be pretty well versed in it, certainly in the basics. All right, so I put that in. Now, what else do we want to do? Well, before I start drilling down on this, let me go ahead and drill down. So here we have one object. I'm going to go over here to my Edit Object and hit Edit Object. You can see it took me right down to it. Hold or sell distressed mortgage. There's the description I typed in. All right, what else can I add to this? Well, what type of decision is it? I already told you this is an operational one. It occurs over and over and over. What's the status level? Is it completed? Has it been implemented? No, it's in process. Is there a URL where some information about the decision is stored that's key? No. This shows how it's linked to other things, and of course not linked to anything yet. And then we scroll down a little bit further. You can see the primary diagram. The question that we need to ask here is, should we collateralize I'll just spell that crazy, this mortgage and sell it? That's the key question, isn't it? That's why we're making this decision. That's behind it. And we can say what kind of answers we will allow. I think somebody still has their doesn't have their mute button pushed, so I'm getting a little feedback. We still have to figure out what kind of answers will you allow. In this case, it's either a yes or no. We either sell it or we don't. So the default is no. We change that to yes for each. We have to do that. Remember, we're going to go through this many, many times, and everybody now knows the drill how we do this. You could also say I'm going to pick from a value list. You could say low, medium, high. You could pick from a database, a number, and other. But we're going to go with yes or no. You could put some more information in here about supporting information. You can put in some other things down here. Now here, this is a very important one. This gives you a feel for the characteristics. How often do we have to make this decision? Oh, we make this a lot. How complex is it? Well, moderately complex. Does it vary a lot? Not really. It's pretty much the same every day. Is it repeatable? Oh, yes. Is it measurable? Well, I hope so. We need to have some kind of key performance indicator that tells us how well we're doing in choosing the mortgages we choose to collateralize and sell. And how about time to outcome? Is it short or long? Well, I'm going to say relatively short. And then perhaps put something in here with value decay on that. You might say that this decision needs to be made within a few hours each time, since conditions change rapidly, or whatever is appropriate. You'd have to know. Again, you're going to be the expert on your decision. And then there's some other things we'll come back to a little bit later. You can even put a comment here. Check with Mary to see if this is correct. Now, when you do a comment, make sure you click submit so that the comment gets submitted. There it is, and when it was done and who did it. And then come back up here, and here's another save button. You have to save these drill downs individually. Save. Now it's saved. So now I go back up here, and you can see I've done one decision. Let me put another one in and link it. Okay, so if I go back to my drawing, how about something like evaluate profitability of selling the mortgage? That's one we could put in there. Okay, so what is it? A decision. In fact, now that I've thought it over, that decision's got to be made before this one. So, evaluate the profitability of selling this mortgage. We don't want to sell it unless we're going to make some money, right? And then you put a description here, something like, this decision assumes the mortgage was previously distressed, but the borrower has now made 12 consecutive payments and it's good to go. Okay? And of course, when I hit enter, it'll change the name of that decision. Okay? Now, I want to save that before I do much. Now I say, this decision has to be made before this one. So let me link that. So you click on the arrow, come over, hover over the middle, and just drag it up. And now they're linked. And then what do? Well, you save it again, just to be sure. And now you're on your way to building this diagram. Again, your decision will be different. You will know all about your decision. You'll know what you got to put in there. So let me move on and put in, of course, can do a drill down on this, edit object. And we can put all the same kinds of material in on this one, okay? Now, some of the objects have more things you can do than others, and you notice they're all open up here, the tabs. I can close those tabs. I still have home. I have this one, and I have this one. Okay, that's the one I did with the drill down. I'll close that. We've already done drilling. So now we're back here. Let's put in this time some kind of a know-how, a knowledge object. So that was this one, right, with the bevel, a knowledge source. And let's say balance sheet management directives. Okay. What are directives? Well, they could be lots of things. They could be guidance you have for your company, rules from the boss. It could be something from the federal government or the state government about how you can sell mortgages and who you can sell them to. And as always, we have to decide how that links into our overall decision. Well, only because I know here that it goes over here. Okay, I'll move it over just so the drawing looks similar. Don't want to confuse you. How do we link knowledge sources to decisions? Well, we use the dotted line to indicate that those are knowledge sources and not sub-decisions. Okay? So now we've linked it. Could I drill down on that one? Sure. Highlight it. Go up to Edit Object. And let's see what we have here. Again, put in a description. Type of know-how. That's kind of neat. Remember, this is a knowledge source, so our pull-down menu gives us some choices. Is it a reg? Is it a policy? Is it somebody's expertise? Is it analytical insight? Is it best practice? Very nice to know what those really key things are. Let's say this is a regulation. Well, let's say it's policy. Okay, URL. You have a URL to that policy somewhere in your database, in your organization, or even externally. Who's the owner of it? How complex is it? Okay, so you have some nice ways of fully framing this. Remember, you're going to try to get everybody who's involved in this decision to agree that, yes, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. This is who's doing it. This is when we're doing it. This is how we're going to measure it with our KPIs, etc. So once you get all of that, again, hit save. And then we can close that one and go back up here. And there we are. Now, we haven't put in a data source yet, so let's put a data source in. I'll bring a data source over. Let's go back to our diagram because I'm trying to mimic this. Here we go. Market bid prices have something to do with evaluating the profitability of selling the mortgage. Okay, that makes sense. So again, we'll hook it up with a solid line. It says this data, remember this is data, inputs and helps make this decision. And let's give it a name, market bid prices. Okay, come over here to the node, market bid prices. All right, you'd put a complete description of what that is. Okay, I'm not sure what it is, but you would know because this would be your decision. And again, how about we go drill down on that, see what we got. Market bid prices, description, data source. Where does it come from? Internal, external, or pooled? Different pull down because different context. Data type, structured, unstructured, semi-structured. Interesting. Complexity, you can make a statement here about how complex it is. URL to go get it and so forth. And here it shows how it fits in. Here it is, and it's in part and parcel helping there. So you would fill that out. Yes, you should fill that out for every node so that there's some information there. Okay? And so now we've done one of each, right? Now, here they are. Looking good, right? So, this is an iterative thing. You'd think more and say, oh, I left something out, and you'd add, you'd add this, you'd add this, you'd add this, you'd add this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Eventually get all that in there. There should be at least one node that says something about an analytic. Notice here, performing loan models. We're not asking you to build the models. We're not asking you to build a regression model, a neural network model, decision tree. We're not asking you to build any kind of analytical model, not a dashboard, nothing. We're just saying put a place in there and put a name on the kind of analytical thing you think would be helpful to this decision. Again, you're in graduate school, so you have some largesse to be a little bit creative. We encourage that. You got to think a little bit. If you were in the real world, obviously you'd have the ability to ask more about what kind of model would actually support the decision. We don't have that. We're not that far along yet, but we want to get you into the business of thinking about framing. Now, as you notice from this diagram, there are many, many, many objects in here. As I said, this was a good one. I've had some that were just as good or better. I've had some that weren't quite as good, but this is a good one. Reasonable number. Got a lot of good stuff. I'm not going to go build all those objects. I'm going to show you a different way to do it. Let me go to my I'll go to a different file here for just a second. Data 610. I got a lot of files, as you can see. Lessons, week 2, Taylor, and I'm going to look for my walkthrough. You will notice that I have something here that's a spreadsheet. Let me open it. There it is. And let me spread things out a little bit. So you're looking at a spreadsheet, and it only has 3 columns: object type, name, description. Exactly those 3 things. And here you see many names for objects. Some are called decisions. Some are called information sources, which are data. And some are called knowledge sources. And then there's a few others, like organizations, some of those minor ones that I mentioned. You'll notice only those names. You can only use the names that are in Decisions First for these things. This is the name of the object. This is that description. Suppose I want to bring a lot of objects in that I may or may not use. I don't have to use them all, but maybe it's easier to work and just start creating objects in a spreadsheet. This is an option. You can certainly do what we've been doing and create them one at a time. But instead, I'm going to bring all these in using this feature just to show it to you called Bulk Create. If you would prefer to go create all of your objects or additional objects in a spreadsheet like this and save it as a CSV, comma, separated values, CSV file, which everybody I think knows how to do using Excel, then you can bring these in bulk. And then they'll just be sitting there in the repository And you can use them if you want to use them or not use them if you don't want to use them. Now, let me just open a recent one to show you something a little bit different. This is the same file, except you may notice that on every one of these, there's an SK2 at the end of it. SK2. SK2. Well, my name is Steve Canode, and the 2 is, I put that there at the end of every one of objects, and here's why. And I wish it were different, but it's not. All of you that are in a section of Data 610, in other words, everybody in my section, 640, you're all using the same database for your Decisions First. That means that when you go in there, all of your classmates' objects will also be sitting there. And so in order to avoid confusion, the practice that we have recommended is that when you create objects, you put your initials or something at the end of them. On the happenstance that two people create the exact same named object, it will be confusing. So again, let me repeat. When you create objects, put your initials at the end of them. That way you'll know, oh, these are my objects, not Fred's objects, not Mary's objects, okay? So I'm going to import this entire file into one big chunk. Now, it has to be closed for me to import it, so I'm going to close it. I don't need to save it. It's already a CSV file. I'm going to close this one. I don't need to save that one. I've got them saved as CSV files already. Okay, so let me go and find them. Well, here it is, right there. I'll import that. That doesn't have my initials on it, but I'm the only one in this particular data set, so I don't need to do that, but you should. So you go to bulk create. It says pick a file. So I'll say browse, and I'll go over here back to my appropriate place to be. Back to Data 610 for the fall. Back to lessons. Back to, oops. Oh, that's 640. Wrong class. Sorry. I got a lot of classes. I'm teaching 3 classes, so I'm a little confused myself sometimes. Week 2. Mr. Taylor and my walkthrough. And holder distress mortgages. And there's my CSK2. Right there. So I say open, and it says okay, and I say yeah, upload that. And it says data loading, boom, 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 and it says you did it. And I say, oh, good. Okay. Now I can go back to home, and guess what? I got lots of objects in here now. I actually have lots of things in here. Okay, let me go back to this and say I want to put in another object. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. Sorry to keep going back and forth. I want to put in this performance prediction. Okay? So I could create a new object and name it performance prediction and fill out the stuff and all, or I can search. And I can just hit enter and say I want to search for performance. Well, let's see. I got to do by type, I think. If you do by type and leave it blank and hit enter, it should come up. Well, let's see here. Oh, I got to search up at the top. By type. Come on, baby. Oh, by name. That's what I want to do. Performance prediction. Okay, there it is. It's a decision, right? That's the little picture of a decision, so I'll just drag that over. Well, I'll drag that over. There it is. Performance prediction, and there's the SK2. And of course, when I double click it, it's got the name of it and anything I had already added. Well, you couldn't add much in the spreadsheet, but it's there. So I'll close bulk creation, and I can add more detail here. But that's another way of getting your objects in. Of course, now I still have to go and link it, right? So I got to go to Object, Edit. Oh, save that, close that. I got to go back to Objects. Click on the solid line, hover over the middle, and click and drag. And I don't know if that's even the right place to hook it up. Yep, performance prediction, part of it. Okay? So as you can see, you begin to go through and create these objects. Okay? So, you know, I've shown you how to drill down. I've shown you, again, how to create the 3 kinds of objects, how to import the bulk objects, how to do the image save. Now, let's say you want to go and create one of these other kinds of objects. Which ones we think would be useful? Well, we already shown how to do a DRD. That's the overall diagram. I've shown you how to do a decision, how to do an input data source, that's the oval, how to input a knowledge source, that's the beveled oval. But what about something like an objective? What's an objective? Well, an objective would be a KPI, a key performance indicator. So let me go and create a new objective. And I'll say profitability measure. And I'll say we want to increase our profits on sold mortgages by 30% over the next 5 years. And again, you have some things you can do with that. You can put a URL in and so forth in here and so on. Now, this one works a little different. Remember, this is not one of our main objects, so it's not going to go on the main screen. First, I'm going to go save it while I'm here, just so I don't lose it. But you can see there's things like decision impact. Well, what's the decision that this impacts? Well, let's go type hold or and see what comes up. Hold or sell distressed mortgages, right? That's one of our decisions. This one is the SK2 one that I brought in, but this is the one I created tonight. So I say, yeah, this KPI, this objective they call it in the software, but it's a KPI. Impact is impact on this decision. So I'm going to hold this down and drag it over and say it goes right here. I can also say it's impact and contribution. I can put things in. I can put in who owns it. I could leave a comment and so forth. And then, I always say submit. I always say save. Submit is really just for the comments. So now that KPI is linked to that decision. Somebody says, oh, this hold or sell, we got any performance measures for that? I'll say, yeah, look, take a look at the performance measure that's there. Suppose you wanted to put something in about who owns that decision. Well, that would be under right here, organization. So I'll click on that one and say mortgage loan officer. And I'll say Mike M. and Mary J. are the loan officers who have to make the ultimate decision. Okay? And I could say, who do they belong to? I can say, well, they belong to these guys, or I can just leave that blank. Do they have any children? Are there organizations under them? And then when you get back here to make the decisions, well, let me type that hold, or just put hold in. There it is again. We only have that one main decision. It could be they could be actually making one of the subsidiary decisions, but I want them to make the primary one, and I'll put it right here and say they make the decision. They own it, and they make it. I can put that over here. I can put it there. And this is a business objective. I can have URLs. I can have comments, again, just like before. So you begin to flesh this out in whatever level of detail you think is appropriate. Again, in the real world, you'd have more level of detail likely than you will in an assignment, but you get there. So now, we're back home. We're looking at this one. Let's say we've finished the whole thing. It's all there. Now, I know it's not, but I've already used 45 minutes of the hour I said I'd hold this to, and so I want to show you the last thing. And I'm just showing you a few things. Mr. Taylor's detailed walkthrough is better than mine. Mine's a little less formal. I'm trying to deal with some issues that sometimes the students come up with, such as bulk create, such as, being able to do the other objectives and then where do they go and how do they fit. And, of course, this will be recorded so you can look at it as many times as you like or ask questions. So let's say we're all done. We've completed this entire diagram. We've finished everything. We've drilled down. We've put in all the details. We're ready to wrap this thing up. We want to create the ARD, Analytics Requirement Document. This is the Decision Requirements Diagram that's part of that. How do we do that? Well, here's where these icons up here are going to come into play. Forget the one that says print. I'm not even sure why that one's there. What you do, and this is very curious, is one way of saying it. First thing you do is you hit print all. Nothing appears to happen except these two items are grayed out for a second. And all of a sudden it comes back and says print all output ready. Click on the Word button to download. Now I'll click on Word. And it says, where do you want to put this? Well, let me put it on C. I'll just put it on C, and I'll just call it Friday night. And I'll say save it on C. Okay, save. Now, I hope you noticed it saved it as what? An XML file. Now, let me go find that file. Okay, I'm going to look on C. I'm going to look for Friday night. There it is. Friday night. It's an XML file. Now, some people are very familiar with XML files. Other people wonder, what in the world is an XML file? You really don't need to worry about it. You should be able to double-click it and have it open up in Word. Mine opened right up in Word. If it didn't, open Word and then go open it up. And, of course, I'll say enable editing so I can deal with it. There's my diagram. Now, your diagram will likely be too large to fit on the page, so, shrink it down. There it is. And guess what's below it? Here we start by outlining every decision. We then show the data sources. We show the knowledge sources, so this will be page after page. Then it goes back and goes into detail about what they are. Here's all the information you put in, the answer type, the questions, the knowledge source, the decision, all the stuff about the properties, the objectives that I put in. Remember, I put in a KPI called profitability measure. I put in an organization, mortgage loan officer. Remember all that? I put all that in there. And so this will be quite voluminous. It'll be many pages. This will be an attachment to your first assignment, the ARD. This is the ARD. Now, of course, you'd want to save it as a doc file or a PDF file and attach it, not an XML file, but it'll open up in Word. And then you will use the first several pages of your actual write-up to describe, here's the decision I chose to do. Here's why I think it's kind of an interesting one. Here's why I think it's kind of important. Here's how we might be able to use it in my organization, if appropriate. Here are some things I learned from the software. Here are some takeaways and so forth. And then go look at the detailed tasking of tasks in the assignment guidance, in the assignment section, so that you know what you're supposed to do and make sure you address each task. Okay? But that's the ARD. Let me go back to the slides. Now, we were already down to way past that one. We were down to this one. Where's my slideshow? There it is. So the end result is that you have a completely framed and documented outline in detail, not outline, in detail of the decision that's going to be made. Now you say, my gosh, this is a lot of work. Let me tell you, when you get out there in the real world, if you don't do something like this, and I think to this level of detail, I think you're going to have great difficulty, because there'll be 15 people in the organization saying, oh, that's not what I thought you were doing, or that's not how I thought you were going to do it, or that's not the resources I thought you needed. Oh, I didn't know you needed to know some regs about that. Oh, I didn't know you needed data from the database. Oh, I didn't know Fred was supposed to help you with that. Oh, I didn't know Mary was in charge of that. It's just a killer. And so, yes, the data scientist needs to be able to do some of this, or at least assist in the framing and make sure that everybody is on the right track. So you can see all the things you get, the objectives, the analytics you need, the decisions impacted, the application context, the organizations, and so forth. Oops, let me not go too fast here. So there's your walkthrough. We're now ready for your questions. And before I start the questions, let me remind you one more thing. We have help from Decisions First for questions that your faculty or TA can't answer. Usually those are only questions that deal with, oh, the software hiccuped or something happened. And you send those questions to support@decisionsfirst.com. I've already mentioned that once or twice, but I'll mention it one more time. They aren't always there on the weekends, so try not to do all of your work on the weekends. I know that's when most of you do your work. We will try to help you. Certainly I can help, and the other professors can help with many of the aspects, but if it's something where the software locked up or hiccuped, they will have to be the ones to help you. And it doesn't happen often, but just so you know, they are on task to support us. Now, where am I going to go to get started? Well, this is a night, and by the way, these slides will also be available with the recording. This is the login page, and as you've already been warned, cautioned, I guess would be a better term, It does not work with Chrome browser. Chrome does not support the Silverlight login add-in that needs to be installed one time. So I use IE, which is what I use tonight. It works great. You can use Firefox. The complete walkthrough by Mr. Taylor is at this link, and it's great. He does a much better job than I do because he built the software, and he knows it better than I do. But I tried to give you a little more, less formal perspective on some of the things. There are tutorials on specific aspects at this link. You say, I want to learn more about objectives. Well, there's a video tutorial on objectives. I want to learn more about organizations. I want to learn more about data sources. I want to learn more about this, how to put them in, how to use them. There are additional written tutorials. These are video tutorials. These are walkthroughs, basically small walkthroughs. These are written tutorials that you can download and have at these various places. And then there's one that they started last semester called UMUC Student Tips. I would certainly recommend you go there first or very soon and take a look at that because they try to update that specifically to help us. They like having, obviously, students at universities using their software. As with all software companies, they're hoping you'll find enough value that you may want your organization to actually purchase the software and use it. You can certainly use it for free in this program, and certainly there's a demo versions for anybody in the organization, but you know, there is a purchase version also. Finally, a little bit on the assignment before I start with some questions. This is an individual assignment. I already mentioned the one thing you have to be careful of is when you build your objects, put your initials at the end of every object name so that I know that this is SK2 belongs to Steve Canode. It just keeps confusion down. You are basically doing two things in this first assignment. First, you're showing that you've sort of grasped the concept of framing. And secondly, you're showing that you have sort of a basic, at least, understanding and can use the software DecisionsFirst. Remember, our entire program is built around competencies. Competencies, not what you know. You may say, well, I know a lot about this software now. I've seen Steve do it, and I've read about it. Yeah, that's great. We want to see you do something with it. Competency-based education is the fulcrum around which the entire program revolves. So you will have the opportunity to do things over and over and over. So you're showing two things. Now again, we have a limited amount of time. You can only do so much. We all understand that as faculty. There are some specific tasks as well as the grading rubric available to you in the assignment area for assignment 1. So you want to make sure that you address each of those tasks. You want to make sure that you comply with the formatting, which says, you know, APA format and so many page limit and so forth. You want to make sure you attach the complete ARD, Analytics Requirement Document, to your short several page paper. You want to make sure that thing's done in enough detail so that when we look at it, we say, oh, yeah, I see, this is very thorough. This is a nice job. And so that's basically the guidance. And we're giving you some freedom. Now, some people say, can I do a decision about whether I want to buy a new home? The answer is, if you can't come up with a business-related one, sure, just to show you can do it. We would prefer that you try harder to look for a business kind of decision. Now, people say, well, what kind of decisions are business decisions? Well, here's some examples. These are examples that predictive analytics can help with. Most of you are in one business or another. Certainly, if you're in the insurance business, there's all kinds of claim things that need to be done. There's all kinds of fraud detection. If you're in the banking business, that's ideal. If you're in the healthcare business, whether or not to readmit a patient. If you're in customer analytics, you know, how do I acquire new patients? Remember, it has to be decisions that ideally are made repeatedly. They're operational, so they get made several times, perhaps several times a day, maybe several times an hour, maybe several times a minute. They have to be measurable in terms of their impact on the bottom line, even if the impact is minimal for each individual decision. They have to be non-trivial, not something where the decision is whether to shut the door after you come in or not. Yeah, well, that's pretty obvious. Yes, shut the door. Although sometimes I have the problem with that. And then the fourth thing is ideally they would be decisions that can be subject to automation, i.e. usually in a term of rules, but we don't need to worry about too much about that. So these are some suggestions of ideas. You can have many others. We're not going to be in the business of approving your ideas. You know, you're on your own. Take a good shot. If it's something you say, well, I don't know anything about fraud detection, well, spend a few days reading about it and thinking about it. Articles. You can find articles that say, you know, when you're doing fraud detection, here's why it's murky. It has to have this, has to have that, has to have the other. Well, those are some of the pieces that have to go into that decision diagram, aren't they? You know, and some of those are knowledge, and some of those are data, and some of those are decisions, and some of those are sub-decisions. Remember, there should always be one main decision that is the focus of the entire decision requirements document. Okay? So again, this was just my CSV file. I was showing you how that works. Okay, so let me get back to, well, I'm still sharing my screen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm back to the main page. Again, we're recording this. I know people, if they have to go or had something else to do tonight, didn't show up, that's fine. We don't take roll, so no extra credit for being here or penalty for not. With that, I will open up the chat window and see if there are questions that I can answer tonight. Remember, you will have the recording, and you certainly can ask questions at any time in the Leo classroom, or email me if you're in my section, and all of the professors work together to try to help each other. So, are there any questions? I really appreciate those of you who did showing up. I know Friday night, I've done several presentations this week at night. Pretty good turnout. Friday night is a tough one, but it was the only night I had available, and I didn't want to wait any longer to give people this little short overview of what Decisions First does and how to get started, because I know that some of you want to do that, whereas others are still mulling over what decision, and you should mull for a while, mull over what kind of a decision would be good for you to try to model. And then what kind of analytics piece, what are the sub-decisions, what are the data requirements, etc. But it's nice to have some people here so I'm not talking to an empty classroom. Well, nobody's putting any tough questions in, and that's understandable on a Friday night. But again, thank you so much for being here. And this recording will show up in the classroom as soon as I have the link. I'll send it to the other professors, and I will post it in 9040. And with that, I'll say good evening, and held it to 57 minutes. Thanks, and have a good weekend. Well, I guess I need to turn the recorder off.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a